The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was filled with representatives from 100 different species. Some floated in liquid tanks, others breathed through masks that filtered the standard atmosphere, and a few simply projected their images from distant worlds. But today, every eye and sensor was focused on the Velthari delegation. Ambassador Kethfer stood at the central platform, his scaled body towering nearly 3 meters tall. His species had conquered 17 star systems in less than 10 years, and their reputation made even the oldest civilizations nervous. When the Velthari spoke, the galaxy listened. Fellow members of the council, Kethfer began. His voice translated into 100 languages simultaneously. We come today to announce our intention regarding the species known as humanity. In the human section of the hall, Ambassador Maria Santos kept her expression calm. She was a small woman with dark hair and tired eyes, and she had spent 30 years in diplomatic service. She had seen threats before, but something about the way the Velthari ambassador smiled made her stomach turn cold. Our empire has studied humanity extensively, Kethfer continued. We have analyzed their history, their culture, their psychology, and we have reached a conclusion that we wish to share with this assembly. He paused for effect, his reptilian eyes scanning the crowd. Humans are perhaps the weakest species to ever achieve interstellar travel. A murmur ran through the hall. Maria's hands tightened on her chair, but she said nothing. Consider the evidence, Kethfer said, warming to his subject. When humans fight wars, they build monuments to remember their dead. They suffer from psychological damage that lasts for generations. Their own citizens protest against military action, sometimes violently. They have created laws that restrict what weapons they can use, even against enemies who want to destroy them completely. Laughter erupted from the Velthari delegation. Several other species joined in, though nervously. They feel guilt for victory, Kethfer added with obvious contempt. They write books questioning whether their wars were justified. They put their own soldiers on trial for being too effective. In short, they are a species that has somehow convinced itself that strength is shameful. Maria stood up. Ambassador Kethfer, humanity's history with warfare is complex. Our reluctance to fight comes from experience, not weakness. Kethfer turned to face her, and his smile widened. Ambassador Santos, please. We have studied your species thoroughly. You cannot bluff us. We know what you are. He turned back to the assembly. Humanity will be given 30 standard cycles to surrender their outer colonies. The systems of New Kansas, Millbrook, and Ashford's world will be transferred to Velthari control. Failure to comply will result in the complete subjugation of human space. We anticipate minimal resistance. His tongue flickered out in what passed for a Velthari laugh. After all, humans don't like war. The transmission was broadcast across every communication network in known space. On Earth, in the underground command center beneath what had once been called the Pentagon. Admiral Grace Patterson watched it in silence. She was 53 years old. With silver-streaked hair cut short and practical, her face showed the lines of someone who had spent decades making difficult decisions, and her eyes held a weight that her staff had learned not to ask about. She had served in 3 terrestrial conflicts before humanity reached the stars, and she still walked with a slight limp from an injury she never discussed. Around her stood the Joint Chiefs of Earth's combined military forces. They represented every nation that had once divided the planet, now united under a single defense command. The room was quiet except for the hum of equipment and the distant sound of a world holding its breath. They're broadcasting this everywhere, said Commander Daniel Cruz, her senior aide. He was young for his position, barely 40, with the kind of sharp mind that had earned him rapid promotion. Every species in the council is watching. They want everyone to see us humiliated. Let them watch, Grace replied. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. It was the voice she used when she was thinking very carefully about something. Admiral, said General Victor Reyes, the commander of ground forces, we should respond. This insult cannot stand. Grace held up her hand. Not yet. She walked closer to the screen, studying the frozen image of Ambassador Kethfer. She looked at his confident posture, the casual cruelty in his eyes, The way he dismissed humanity is beneath consideration. "They've made their first mistake," she said quietly. Daniel frowned. "What mistake?" "They studied our history. They saw our memorials, our protests, our laws of war, and they concluded that we're too soft to fight." Grace turned to face her staff. "They don't understand what any of that actually means." "What does it mean, Admiral?" asked General Susan Park, Commander of Naval Forces. Grace was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had changed. The softness was gone, replaced by something harder and older. "It means we've been trying very hard not to become something terrible. It means we built rules and monuments and traditions to remind ourselves of what we're capable of, so that we might choose differently. It means that every time we say never again, we're not making a promise to the universe. We're making a promise to ourselves." She walked to the central command table and placed her hands flat on its surface. "The Velthri think our reluctance is weakness. They think our guilt is softness. They think our memorials are admissions of defeat." She looked up at her commanders. "They have no idea that those things are chains. Chains we've built ourselves to hold back something that we've spent 10,000 years trying to control. And if those chains come off," Daniel asked quietly. Grace Patterson met his eyes. In that moment, he saw something in her expression that he had never seen before. Something that made him understand why she had risen to command humanity's military forces. Despite never seeking glory or recognition, then the galaxy learns why we built them in the first place. "Straightened up. Contact President Martinez. Tell him I'm implementing Defense Protocol 7. Start recalling our veterans. Every single one who's willing to serve. Send word to our colonies to begin evacuation preparations, but quietly. I don't want the Velthri to know we're taking them seriously." Daniel asked. "Should we respond to the ultimatum?" Grace shook her head. "No response. Not yet. Let them think we're paralyzed by fear. Let them think they've already won." A cold smile crossed her face, there and gone in an instant. "The Velthri want to learn about humanity's relationship with war. We'll give them an education they'll never forget." She turned and walked toward the door. Admiral Daniel called after her. "What should I tell the press? The people are going to panic." Grace paused at the threshold. She didn't turn around. "Tell them the truth. Tell them that humanity has been challenged, and that we will respond in the way our ancestors always responded when someone threatened our existence." Her voice carried clearly through the silent room. "Tell them that we don't want this war. Tell them that we'll do everything in our power to avoid it. And tell them that if we can't avoid it, we will win it. Whatever the cost." She walked out. Leaving her staff in silence, Daniel Cruz looked at the frozen image of Ambassador Kethfer, still smiling his confident smile. Still certain of humanity's weakness. "You have no idea what you've just done," he whispered to the image. "You really have no idea." Across human space, the machinery of war began to wake from its long sleep. And in 100 million homes, on 100 different worlds, humanity began to remember what it had spent so long trying to forget. The recruitment centers opened at dawn on every human world. The military expected young volunteers, fresh graduates looking for purpose, and adventurers seeking excitement. They got something else entirely, on the colony world of New Kansas. A 70-year-old farmer named Harold Price walked through the doors of the local recruitment office. He moved slowly, his joints stiffed from decades of working the land, and his hands trembled slightly as he approached the desk. The young officer behind the counter looked up with surprise. "Can I help you?" Harold placed his identification card on the desk. "I want to enlist." The officer, a corporal named Jenny Walsh, picked up the card and scanned it. Her eyes widened as the information appeared on her screen. "Mr. Price, you served in the Pacific Conflict of 2089. You were a combat engineer. You received 3 commendations for bravery and were medically discharged after. After I spent 6 months in a field hospital putting myself back together," Harold finished. "I know my own history, Corporal." Jenny looked at him with a mixture of respect and concern. "Sir, you're 72 years old?" You have a farm, a family. We have plenty of young people enlisting. You don't have to do this." Harold was quiet for a moment. Through the window behind Jenny, he could see more people arriving at the center. Some of them he recognized, neighbors and friends. People who had spent their whole lives building things instead of destroying them. They were all coming for the same reason. "That's exactly why I'm here," he said finally. "Because you have plenty of young people enlisting. Those kids have their whole lives ahead of them. They've never seen what war really looks like. They think it's exciting." He shook his head slowly. "I spent 40 years trying to forget what I learned in the Pacific. 40 years of nightmares and therapy, and wondering if I'd ever feel normal again. I promised myself I'd never hold a weapon again. Then why are you here?" Harold met her eyes. "Because if old men like me don't stand up, more young people will have to. Because I already know what it costs, and I've already paid that price once. Because some kid with a future shouldn't have to become what I became, not if I can prevent it." Jenny was silent for a long moment. Then she handed him the enlistment forms. The scene repeated itself across 100 worlds. Veterans of forgotten wars emerged from quiet retirements. Men and women who had sworn never to fight again walked into recruitment centers with old scars and heavy hearts. They came not because they wanted to, but because they understood something that younger generations had been blessed enough to forget. On Earth, Dr. Linda Graham stood before an assembly of alien diplomats. She was a historian, 55 years old, with gray hair and glasses that she constantly pushed up her nose. The Galactic Council had requested a briefing on human military psychology, and she had been chosen to deliver it. The chamber was filled with representatives from neutral species, observers who had not taken sides in the coming conflict. They looked at her with curiosity, and, in some cases, barely hidden amusement. The Velthary's broadcast had convinced many of them that humanity was indeed as weak as claimed. "You want to understand why humans fight the way we do?" Linda began. "You've seen our memorials, our protests, our laws of war. You've heard the Velthary ambassador call us weak. Let me explain what you're actually looking at." She pressed a button and images appeared on the screen behind her. Ancient battlefields, medieval sieges, modern warfare with its trenches and bombs, the destruction of cities and conflicts that most species had never heard of. Humanity has been at war with itself since before we could write. We have spent our entire existence finding new and more efficient ways to kill each other. Every generation, we tell ourselves that the last war was the final one, that we've learned our lesson, that we'll never do it again. And every generation, we find a new reason to break that promise. She changed the image to show a memorial, a simple wall covered with names. These monuments that the Velthary mock, they're not signs of weakness. They're warnings. We build them so we never forget what we're capable of. We build them so our children know the true cost of the violence we hope they'll never have to experience. A Nalthian observer raised a tentacle. "If you're so good at warfare, why do you avoid it? Why not simply conquer the galaxy as the Velthary have done?" Linda smiled sadly. "Because we've already conquered ourselves, and we know what that looks like. We've committed every atrocity you can imagine. Can't many that you can't. Genocide, torture, the deliberate targeting of civilians. Weapons designed to kill slowly and painfully. We've done all of it, and we've done it to our own species." She let that sink in. "The reason we have laws of war isn't because we're too soft to break them. It's because we broke them so many times, in so many terrible ways, that we finally realized we needed rules to stop ourselves. The reason we protest against military action is because we've seen what happens when we don't. The reason our veterans suffer psychological damage is because they've looked into the darkest parts of human nature and recognized themselves." "Then you are damaged," another observer said. "Broken, no," Linda replied firmly. "We're aware. There's a difference. The Velthary look at us and see a species that can't handle war. They're wrong. We're a species that handles war too well. We're so good at destruction that we've had to build entire civilizations around the idea of preventing ourselves from using that ability." She turned off the images. "You want to know what? you're really looking at when you see human reluctance to fight? You're looking at a loaded weapon with its safety on. The safety isn't there because the weapon is broken. It's there because the weapon works perfectly. And everyone knows how dangerous it would be if it went off. She gathered her notes. The Velthari have just pulled the trigger on a gun they don't understand. When they realize what they've done, it will be too late. Humanity doesn't want this war. We've spent centuries trying to become better than our nature. But if we're forced to fight, we will not hold back. We can't afford to. Because once we start, the only thing that will stop us is total victory or total destruction. She looked at the assembled diplomats. I suggest you tell your governments to stay out of the way. This isn't going to be the war the Velthari expected. This is going to be something much, much worse. She walked out of the chamber, leaving stunned silence behind her. On the colony world of Millbrook, a schoolteacher named Patricia Dunn finished her last class of the day. Her students were 8 years old, full of innocent questions about the alien ships that had appeared in their sky. She answered them as gently as she could, hiding her own fear behind a calm smile. After the children left, she sat alone in her empty classroom and made a decision. Patricia had never held a weapon in her life. She had dedicated herself to building minds, not destroying bodies. She believed in peace, in diplomacy, in the fundamental goodness of sentient beings. But her students were 8 years old, and the Velthari were coming. She pulled out her communicator and called the local resistance coordinator. By the end of the week, she would learn how to shoot. By the end of the month, she would learn how to kill. And by the end of the year, she would become one of the most wanted insurgents in Velthari controlled. Space not because she wanted to, because she had no choice. Captain Nathan. Cole stood on the bridge of the destroyer Relentless and watched the tactical display with calm eyes. The screen showed 217 Velthari warships approaching Ashford's world, a farming colony with 12,000 civilians and almost no strategic value. Against this armada, Nathan had 30 destroyers and a prayer. Sir, said Lieutenant Amy Huang, his second in command, Earth Command is offering evacuation priority. They can get the civilian transports out, but they need at least 18 hours. The Velthari will be here in 12. Nathan was 44 years old. He had a daughter named Katie who had just started university on Earth, studying to be a doctor. He had promised his ex-wife that he would retire next year, that he would finally be safe. He had been counting the days until he could hang up his uniform and become the father he had never had time to be. He looked at Amy, who was 26 and engaged to be married. He looked at his bridge crew, most of them barely out of training. He thought about his daughter and he made his decision. Contact the other destroyers, he said. We're not evacuating. We're buying time. Amy stared at him. Sir, 30 destroyers against 200 warships? The math doesn't work. The math never works, Nathan replied quietly. That's not the point. The point is that there are 12,000 people on that planet, and if we run, they die. So we don't run. He opened a channel to his fleet. All ships, this is Cole. I'm not going to pretend this is going to be easy. I'm not going to tell you that we're going to win. What I'm going to tell you is that there are families down there who are counting on us to give them time to escape. Children who will grow up to do amazing things if we can keep them alive long enough. I know what I'm asking. I know the cost. But I also know that this is why we're here. Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to protect. So we stand, we fight, and we make every second count. He paused.
Yeah, for those of you who have families.
Write your letters now. Make sure they know what you did and why. And when this is over, whether we're still here or not, make sure the universe knows that humanity doesn't abandon its own. Cole out. The Battle of Ashford's world began 4 hours later. The Velthari commander expected a conventional engagement. Human ships would form defensive lines, exchange fire, and eventually retreat when losses became too heavy. It was how every other species fought, and the Velthari had perfected the art of breaking such defenses. What they got instead was something from humanity's oldest nightmares. Nathan. Cole had studied military history his entire career. Not the sanitized versions taught in academies, but the real histories. the ones that showed what humans did when they were desperate. He knew about the guerrilla wars of ancient Earth, where small forces destroyed empires through patience and sacrifice. He knew about naval battles, where captains rammed their ships into enemies rather than surrender. He knew about soldiers who held positions for days without sleep, without food, without hope, simply because giving up was not an option. He applied every lesson. The destroyers didn't form defensive lines. They scattered, hiding in the asteroid belt that ringed Ashford's system. They attacked in groups of 2 or 3, striking at vulnerable points in the Veltari formation and disappearing before the enemy could respond. They used the asteroids as weapons, pushing them into collision courses with Veltari ships. They broadcast false signals to confuse enemy sensors. They did everything except fight fair. Enemy destroyer eliminated, Amy reported, her voice tight with exhaustion. They had been fighting for 6 hours. 8 human ships were gone, but they had destroyed 31 Veltari vessels and forced the enemy to slow their advance to a crawl. Nathan nodded. His hands ached from gripping his command chair, and his eyes burned from staring at tactical displays. But he couldn't rest. Not yet. Time till civilian evacuation is complete? 3 hours. Time until Veltari breakthrough. Amy hesitated. 2 hours. Maybe less. They're adapting to our tactics. Nathan studied the display. He had known from the beginning that this moment would come. He had hoped they might delay it longer, but hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. All ships, he said into the fleet channel. This is Cole. Phase 2. The remaining 22 destroyers stopped hiding. They emerged from the asteroid belt and formed a single line between the Veltari fleet and Ashford's world. It was suicide, and everyone knew it. Sir, Amy said quietly, the crew is ready. Nathan looked at her. She was crying, but her hands were steady on her console. He wanted to tell her how proud he was, how sorry he was that it had come to this. But there was no time. Open a channel to the Veltari flagship. A moment later, the scaled face of the Veltari fleet commander appeared on screen. Human, the commander said with contempt, you have fought well for a weak species. Surrender now, and I will grant you quick deaths. Nathan smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. I wanted to make sure you were watching, he said. I wanted you to see what happens next. I wanted you to understand something about humanity before we die. The commander's eyes narrowed. What could you possibly teach me? That we don't fight to win. Nathan leaned forward. We fight to make you pay. Every ship you lose today, every soldier, every resource, it all comes out of your empire's strength. You can kill us, but you can't kill us cheaply. And the next system you attack will cost you even more. And the one after that. Until eventually, you'll realize that conquering humanity will cost more than we're worth. He gestured to his crew. These people are volunteers. They know they're going to die. They chose to be here anyway, because they believe in something worth dying for. Can you say the same about your soldiers? Will they keep fighting when they realize that every victory is actually a defeat? The commander hissed in anger. You're bluffing. You're trying to delay the inevitable. I'm trying to teach you, Nathan said softly. But you're not listening. So we'll show you instead. He cut the channel. All ships, he said, his voice steady, ramming speed. The Battle of Ashford's world lasted 9 hours total. 23 human destroyers were lost, including the relentless Captain Nathan Cole died at his post, along with 4,847 other humans who chose to stand between civilians and annihilation. But when the Veltari finally broke through the line, they found empty colony buildings and evacuation ships already in hyperspace. 12,000 civilians escaped, including 300 children who would grow up knowing that strangers had died, so they could live. The Veltari had won the battle. They had lost 61 ships and learned something that would haunt them. For the rest of the war, humans did not fight like other species. They did not fight to win. They fought to make the enemy bleed. On Earth, Admiral Grace Patterson stood in the memorial hall as the names of the fallen were read aloud. The ceremony lasted 14 hours, one name at a time. Because humanity did not forget its dead, When they reached Nathan Cole's name, Grace closed her eyes. She had known him once. They had served together decades ago, before she became an admiral and he became a captain. She remembered a young man who loved to laugh, who talked about his future family, who believed that humanity's best days were ahead of them. She wondered if he had been afraid at the end. She hoped he had found peace. The reading continued. Name after name, each one a universe of lost possibilities. And Grace Patterson stood at attention for every single one, bearing witness to the cost of the war she had helped to start. When it was over, Daniel Cruz found her standing alone in the empty hall. "Admiral," he said quietly, "the president is asking for you." Grace didn't move. "Do you know why we read the names, Daniel? To honor the fallen?" No. She turned to face him, and her eyes were red but dry. "We read them so we remember what we're spending. Every name is a price we paid. Every name is a reason to end this war as quickly as possible, so we don't have to pay any more." She straightened her uniform. "What does the president want?" "The Velthari are requesting negotiations." Ashford's world shook them more than they expected. Grace nodded slowly. "Not yet. They haven't learned enough. When they're ready to treat us as equals, we'll talk. Until then, we keep fighting." She walked past him, toward the door, and Daniel. "Start planning the next memorial. This war isn't over yet." 3 months into the war, the Velthari controlled 7 human colonies. Their fleet had suffered heavy losses, far more than expected, but they had still advanced steadily into human space. Their commanders expected that any day now, humanity would realize the hopelessness of their situation and surrender. They were still waiting, on the occupied world of Millbrook. Patricia Dunn crouched in the ruins of what had once been a shopping center. 3 months ago, she had been a school teacher who had never held a weapon. Now she commanded a resistance cell of 47 fighters. And the Velthari had put a bounty on her head worth more than most starships. "Movement on the south perimeter," whispered Roger Kim, her second in command. He was a former accountant, 50 years old, with bad knees and perfect aim. Before the invasion, his biggest worry had been filing taxes on time. Now he was one of the most effective snipers in the resistance. Patricia raised her binoculars and studied the Velthari patrol. 6 soldiers. Standard formation, walking the same route they had walked every night for the past week. The Velthari were creatures of habit. They believed in order, in discipline, in the superiority of their methods. They couldn't imagine that anyone would be crazy enough to attack them in their own occupied territory. "Wait for my signal," Patricia said softly. "Remember, we hit hard and we disappear. No heroics. Our job is to make them afraid, not to win battles." She thought about her students evacuated to Earth before the invasion. She wondered if they remembered her, if they knew what their teacher had become. She hoped they never had to find out. The patrol passed a burned-out vehicle. Patricia gave the signal. The attack lasted 11 seconds. 6 Velthari soldiers died without ever seeing their killers. By the time reinforcements arrived, Patricia's cell had vanished into the underground tunnels that honeycombed the city, across the planet. Similar scenes played out every night. Supply convoys ambushed. Communication towers destroyed. Velthari officers assassinated in their quarters. The occupation force found itself fighting an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere. An enemy that refused to stand and fight like civilized beings. High Commander Zethkal received the reports in his flagship orbiting Millbrook. He had expected resistance to collapse within weeks of the occupation. Instead, it was growing stronger. "They're not soldiers," his intelligence officer explained nervously. "They're civilians. Teachers, farmers, shopkeepers. They have no training, no proper equipment, no military structure. By all logic, they should have given up months ago." Zethkel hissed in frustration. "Then why haven't they?" "Because they don't think like soldiers, Commander. Soldiers fight to win. These people fight to hurt us. They don't care about survival. They don't care about victory. They just want to make the occupation as painful as possible." The commander studied the reports. Casualty figures destroyed equipment, disrupted supply lines. None of it was enough to threaten the occupation by itself. But the cumulative effect was devastating. His forces were exhausted, demoralized, constantly looking over their shoulders. They had conquered Millbrook, but they couldn't control it. Out! What do the humans want? He asked. What would make them stop? The intelligence officer hesitated. Nothing, Commander. Our psychological experts have analyzed their communications. They know they can't win. They know the occupation will continue. They fight anyway. They call it resistance, but it's more than that. It's a message. What message? That conquering humanity will cost more than we're willing to pay. Every soldier we lose, every ship we destroy replacing sabotaged equipment, every resource we spend on security, it all adds up. They're making victory worthless. Zethkal stood and walked to the viewport. Below him, Millbrook looked peaceful from orbit. But he knew that peace was an illusion. Somewhere down there, humans were planning their next attack, their next act of defiance, their next way to make his life difficult. There's something else, the intelligence officer said quietly. Something our experts have been afraid to report. Speak. The humans aren't just fighting us, Commander. They're using their children. Zethkal turned sharply. Explain. Children as young as 8 are serving as scouts and messengers. They draw maps of our patrol routes and pass them to resistance fighters. They pretend to be innocent while gathering intelligence. We caught one last week trying to poison a water supply. The officer swallowed. Commander, they're turning their own children into weapons. For the first time since the war began, Zethkal felt something like unease. The Velthari protected their young above all else. The idea of deliberately putting children in harm's way was unthinkable, monstrous. This is a species that claims to value life, he said slowly. They build memorials to their dead. They suffer psychological damage from violence. How can they do this? Because they value survival more, the officer replied. Their history is full of examples. When threatened with extinction, humans will sacrifice anything, including their own children, including their own sanity, including everything they claim to believe in. They call it desperation, but it's more than that. It's adaptation. They become whatever they need to be to survive. Zethkal was silent for a long moment. Show me their history, he said finally. Show me everything we have on human warfare. Not the summary reports, everything. The next 6 hours changed High Commander. Zethkal's understanding of the war he was fighting, he learned about the ancient sieges where humans ate their own dead rather than surrender. He learned about the great wars of their industrial age, where tens of millions died in trenches that moved barely a kilometer in years of fighting. He learned about the weapons they had created, bombs that could destroy cities in an instant, poisons that killed slowly and painfully, diseases engineered to spread through populations. He learned about the things humans did to each other, not to aliens, not to enemies from other worlds, but to their own species, genocide, ethnic cleansing, the systematic murder of millions for reasons of religion, politics, or simple hatred. And he learned the most disturbing truth of all, that humans knew exactly what they were capable of, and they were terrified of it. They didn't build their laws of war because they were weak, the intelligence officer said. They built them because they were afraid of themselves. Every rule, every restriction, every tradition of mercy, it was all designed to prevent them from becoming the monsters they knew they could be. He thought about the resistance fighters on Millbrook, ordinary people who had transformed themselves into killers. He thought about the children carrying messages through dangerous streets. He thought about the soldiers at Ashford's World who had chosen certain death rather than retreat. What happens if we push them further? He asked quietly. What happens if we threaten their homeworld, their survival as a species? The intelligence officer didn't answer. He didn't need to. The historical records spoke for themselves. Contact the council, Zethkal said finally. Tell them I'm requesting a strategic review, and prepare a communication for the human command. What should it say, Commander? Zethkal looked at the image of Earth on his display. A small blue world that had somehow produced the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever seen. Tell them we want to talk. On Earth. Admiral Grace Patterson received the message with no visible reaction. She read it twice, then set it aside. "They're not ready yet," she told Daniel Cruz. "They still think they can win. They're hoping diplomacy will give them what warfare couldn't." "How do you know?" Grace smiled, but there was no warmth in it, because they haven't seen what we're really capable of. They've seen the resistance, the sacrifices, the determination. They haven't seen the weapons we've been holding in reserve. They haven't seen what we'll do if we have to. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city beyond. "My grandfather fought in the last great war on Earth," she said quietly. "He never talked about what he did, but I found his journals after he died. He wrote about the things he saw, the things he did. He wrote that war didn't make him a monster. It just showed him the monster that was already there, waiting." She turned back to Daniel. "Every human carries that monster inside them. We spend our whole lives trying to be better than it, trying to prove that we're more than our darkest impulses. The Velthari looked at our memorials and our protests and thought they saw weakness. They didn't understand that those things exist because we know exactly how strong the monster is. So what do we do now? We wait. We let them see more of what we can do. And eventually, when they finally understand what they're dealing with, they'll be ready to make a real peace." She sat back down at her desk. "In the meantime, increase support to the resistance on Millbrook, and start preparing the next phase of our defensive plans. The weapons we've been holding back?" Grace nodded slowly. "I pray we never have to use them. But if the Velthari don't learn their lessons soon, we may not have a choice. And when that happens, the galaxy will finally understand why humans have spent so long trying to keep ourselves on a leash." She picked up the Velthari message and filed it away. "Not yet," she said to herself, "but soon." The war ended not with a final battle, but with a conversation. High Commander Zethkal requested a meeting with Admiral Grace Patterson 6 months after the invasion began. The neutral Nalthian Concordat agreed to host the summit on their diplomatic station at the edge of known space. Both sides were allowed minimal escorts, a gesture of good faith that neither commander entirely trusted. Grace arrived first. Accompanied only by Daniel Cruz, she wore her dress uniform, the one reserved for ceremonies and formal occasions. It felt strange after months of combat fatigues and strategy sessions, but she understood the importance of appearances. This meeting would determine whether the war continued or ended. The Nalthian station was beautiful in an alien way. All flowing curves and soft bioluminescent lighting, Grace barely noticed. Her mind was on the conversation ahead and the weight of the decisions she would have to make. "Admiral," Daniel said quietly, "the Velthari shuttle has docked. Commander Zethkal will be here in 5 minutes." Grace nodded. "Thank you, Daniel. Wait outside. I need to do this alone." He hesitated. "Are you sure? This is between commanders. Between species? Really. If we can't find common ground here, it won't matter how many witnesses we have." Daniel left, and Grace waited in silence. When Zethkal entered, she studied him carefully. He was taller than she expected, nearly 3 meters of scaled muscle and predatory grace. His eyes were yellow with vertical pupils, and his claws clicked softly against the floor as he walked. He looked like a nightmare made flesh, exactly the kind of creature that should have terrified her. She felt nothing. "Admiral Patterson," Zethkal said, his translator rendering his words in flat, emotionless English. "Your species has cost me 11,000 ships and 19 million soldiers." Grace stood to face him. "And yours has cost me 4 colonies, 63 ships, and 847,000 human lives. I remember every number. We always do." They looked at each other for a long moment, predator and prey, except that neither was quite sure anymore which was which. "I want to understand," Zethkal said finally. He sat down across from her at the simple table, and Grace followed. "Your species has all the signs of pacifism. Your hatred of war is genuine. Your psychological trauma is real, not invented. Your laws restricting warfare are sincere attempts to limit violence. And yet, when we pushed you, you fought with a cruelty that my own species would find excessive." He leaned forward. "How do you hate war so deeply and still wage it so effectively. Grace was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. This was the moment that mattered, the moment when she either made peace or condemned both species 2 years more of bloodshed. "Because they're not contradictions," she said finally. "You looked at our memorials and saw weakness. You heard about our psychological damage and thought we were broken. You learned about our laws of war and assumed we were too soft to break them." She shook her head slowly. "You misunderstood everything." She stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. "Oh, you know why we build memorials, Commander?" "It's not to celebrate victory. It's to remember what we're capable of. Every monument, every name carved in stone, it's a reminder of the price we paid and the things we did to pay it. We remember our wars because we know what's inside us, and it terrifies us." She turned to face him. "You know what post-traumatic stress actually means? It means that our soldiers have seen the truth about themselves. They've looked into the darkest parts of human nature and recognized their own reflection. They've done things that haunt them forever, not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to do what was necessary and wise enough to be horrified by it afterward." Zethkul was silent, listening. "Our laws of war aren't restrictions imposed by cowardice. They're chains we built ourselves to hold back the thing inside us. Every rule about treating prisoners humanely, about protecting civilians, about not using certain weapons, those exist because we broke those rules so many times, in so many terrible ways, that we finally realized we needed to stop ourselves." She sat back down across from him. "You thought our reluctance was weakness? It wasn't. It was the recognition that once we start fighting, truly fighting, we don't know how to stop. We're so good at war, Commander, that we've spent 10,000 years trying to become something else. Every advance in human civilization, every moral philosophy, every religious teaching about peace and compassion, they all exist because we know what happens when we give in to our nature." "And what happens?" Zethkul asked quietly. Grace met his eyes. "We destroy everything. Ourselves included. We've done it before, many times. We've wiped out entire peoples, burned cities to the ground, poisoned lands so nothing could ever grow there again. We've created weapons that could end all life on our planet, and we came within minutes of using them. Not against aliens. Against ourselves." She leaned forward. "You gave us permission to become the thing we've spent thousands of years trying not to be. You attacked our homes, killed our families, occupied our worlds. And so we stopped pretending to be civilized. We stopped holding back. We became what we were always afraid of becoming." Zethkul was silent for a long moment. "The resistance on Millbrook," he said finally. "The children carrying messages, the civilians becoming assassins, the willingness to die for nothing more than spite. That's not normal behavior. That's not what sane beings do." No, Grace agreed. "It's not. And that's exactly why you should be afraid of us. Because we're not sane, Commander. Not by your standards. We're a species that managed to survive our own nature long enough to reach the stars, but the nature is still there. It's always there. Waiting." She stood again.
I want peace.
"I've wanted it from the beginning. Every human death in this war weighs on me personally. There will never be a night when I don't think about the price we've paid. But I need you to understand something before we can have peace." "What?" "That if you ever threaten humanity again, we will not hold back. We will not fight with restraint. We will become the monsters we've been trying so hard not to be, and we will not stop until one of us is completely destroyed." She paused. "And that's not a threat, Commander. It's a warning. A warning about what we are and what we'll do if we're pushed too far." Zethkul stood to face her. They were nearly the same height with him standing, and Grace found herself looking into eyes that had seen their own share of violence and death. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because I want peace," she said simply. "Real peace, not just a pause before the next war. And the only way to have that is for both of us to understand each other. You need to know what you're dealing with. You need to know that humanity's reluctance to fight is not weakness, but wisdom. And you need to know that if you respect that wisdom, if you treat us as equals and leave us in peace, you will never have to see what we're truly capable of." The peace treaty was signed 3 days later, The Velthari withdrew from all human territories. They paid reparations that would take a century to complete. They released every prisoner, returned every occupied world, and formally recognized humanity's right to exist as an independent species. And they added a new entry to their archives. Classified at the highest level of their government, do not provoke humanity. They are not pacifists. They are something far more dangerous. Predators who have chosen to be peaceful. That choice can be unmade. On Earth, Admiral Grace Patterson attended the memorial for the fallen. She stood in the Great Hall as the names were read aloud. 847,000 souls who had given everything so that humanity could survive. Daniel Cruz found her afterward, standing alone at the wall of remembrance. She was touching one of the names, tracing the letters with her fingers. "We won," he said quietly. Grace shook her head. "We survived. That's not the same thing." She stepped back from the wall. "Make sure the history books remember the cost. Every name, every number. Because the moment we forget what we paid for peace, we'll lose it again. And if we remember..." Grace Patterson turned away from the wall. Her eyes were dry, but something old and heavy lived in them. "Then maybe next time we can find another way. Maybe next time we can talk before we have to fight. Maybe next time we can be the people we want to be instead of the people we're afraid of being." She walked toward the exit. "That's all we can ever do, Daniel. Try to be better than we were, and pray that we never have to prove what we're capable of again." She stopped at the door and looked back at the wall of names one last time. "But if we do have to prove it," she said softly, "we will. Whatever the cost. Because that's who we are. Monsters who chose to be human for as long as we can." She walked out into the sunset, leaving Daniel alone with the weight of a truth the galaxy had finally learned. Humans don't like war, but that has never, ever meant they couldn't win one.